Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is Debate Sensei NFA LD edition, where we talk about things relevant to the Lincoln Douglas debate event of the National Forensics Association. I have with me our resident expert, Dr. Justin Kirk from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Thank you,
Jared.
Justin.
How's it going?
Doing all right. It's kind of a busy weekend. I got this Monday off, and so for Cesar Chavez Day, lucky me. And
nice.
So I am. Excellent.
We may be visited by my new kitten, Toby, at some point during the broadcast. I just want to let viewers know that, like, if there's a kitten that's popping around, we've had him for about 2 weeks, and he will not listen to come on the podcast instructions. So,
excellent. So today we are talking about how the AI topic for this year's debate topic for NFALD might be affected by the Musk / Trump White House, and so in Justin suggested a really awesome way to sort of structure this out. I love it, using the SWOT framework. I was unfamiliar with it, but so with strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I think that's a great way to I always love having a framework for anything that I could just pull on. You know what I mean? It's like, if I don't know how to do something, of like, smarter people than me have come up with solutions for this, and relying on that.
Well, and I think it's early, right? It's early in the Trump administration. We don't really know kind of what their kind of end game is on AI. So I think that taking an approach that a lot of people use when they're planning or making, business strategies and things like that might be helpful. So
nice. I like it. So I'm using a few AI generated notes myself on this one, and so some of these are not for me. I'm not really. I'm kind of looking at them with a little side eye. I'm like, I don't know about that. Let's take a look. Let's start with the strengths. All right. And so if you were going to frame the strengths, specifically in AI policy, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that we can talk about this in a couple of different ways. The first, we can talk about like AI governance, right? Okay. And I think one of the strengths, if you're an AI developer of the Trump administration, is that they're going to be very lax on regulating AI, right? They've signaled by overturning Biden's executive order on AI, and by removing key members of AI regulatory agencies, that the Trump administration is going to be friendly to open competition in the AI market space. It's a pretty big strength if you're somebody who's developing AI models or in that kind of growth space. I think another kind of thing to think about too is the kind of relationships that Trump has with business leaders in AI. Right? Like, and we kind of tentatively titled this in the Trump Musk era. That should give you some indication already of Trump's interest in the AI industry, right? He and Elon Musk are pretty closely allied right now. He also recently signed a deal with Oracle and OpenAI's Sam Altman worth about $500 billion to build data centers in the United States. So if you're somebody who's an industry leader in AI, somebody who's riding high on the AI bubble, I think that there's a lot to be said for the early stages of the Trump administration policies.
And also, like, I think, and Musk himself has relationships that might frame this. So there is a bit of a tension between Musk and OpenAI, right?
Musk used to sit on the board of OpenAI back in the day, right? Left that company. He has his own kind of LLM called Grok that they've been using. Actually, one of the things that's just been coming out recently is they've been using Grok in different ways to help Doge kind of dismantle these agencies it's been going through and kind of picking apart. And so one of the things that like is very clear is that Elon has been using some of his AI knowledge while kind of having power within the government.
Right. Okay. And so one of the things that was generated, I think the innovation catalysts, I love that little title. I think that might be sort of what you're talking about, where the competition being one of those potential catalysts for innovation in AI.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you can causally link this to like Trump's policy specifically, but a couple weeks ago on Ezra Klein's podcast, which I would recommend to anybody in debate. Like if you are a debater, listening to the Ezra Klein podcast will keep you everything. But he had on Biden's AI expert, the person who helped Biden craft his regulations on AI. And this guy's convinced that by the end of 2026, early 2027, maybe mid 2027 at the latest, we'll have some form of artificial generative intelligence, AGI. And that is primarily, he says, due to open and kind of competitive business practices. Now, I think he kind of links those to the way that Biden helped pick winners and losers. But I think it's really hard to assign kind of causal linkage to a particular president. But know that like Trump is doing everything he can regulatorily, government-wise at the federal level to provide the space for innovation, for development, for new AI to get produced.
Okay. One of the other strengths I thought was actually pretty astute was public awareness. I think just the fact that, they actually want to talk about it, as opposed to, somebody Trump's age could easily I don't care about that type of stuff. But because of Musk's influence, probably it makes it even more of a top priority, just a thing of discussion, something that he seems interested in, and therefore his followers would also be interested in it.
Well, and I think you get a lot of this in the literature as well, right? The people who tend to be industry experts are people who probably are a little bit more on the techno-optimist side of things with AI and want to talk about all of its potential uses, the way it can be applied, right? And a lot of times at the Biden administration, they took a risk-based approach, very much like the European Union, which is what are the potential fallbacks of AI? And so I think you're seeing a very much fundamentally different approach to technology from the Trump-Musk folks. A much more kind of, well, the risks will be found out when they're found out, but not a kind of risk-oriented or risk-founded approach to AI.
Okay. All right. So those are strengths. Let's move on to weaknesses.
Weaknesses. I think some of the weaknesses of this administration stem from some of the same philosophical undergirdings, right? The fact that they aren't taking a risk-based approach means that there is a higher risk under the Trump administration of malicious or malevolent AI or biased AI or inaccurate AI or the use of AI for, problematic social behaviors, right? Deep fakes and whatnot. I think all of those increase in a world where Trump has rolled back Biden era AI regulations and is taking very much a laissez-faire open markets approach to AI. I think that, there's kind of the social risk of AI has gone up substantially under Trump, given that he is not likely to follow on to the EU AI Act, which means there won't be risk-based analysis of different AI applications. He's also likely to just allow AI companies to do what they want, right? If they pay him or if they do favors to him, much like Facebook or Amazon or Sam Altman on OpenAI, he's likely to cut them deals, right? That's the kind of president he is. He's transactional, and he understands when you pay him money or you provide him goods and services, he gives you something that you want, which is probably fewer regulations or some sweetheart subsidies, know? And I think that both could be good for the market, but also tremendously bad for the market, right? Imagine if we had invested in a nuclear weapons company that was very bad at things like safety and security, or a company that made nuclear plants based on the Chernobyl design, right? Like that would be something that would be probably pretty harmful to the U.S. national security. And designing AI based on bad models or without safety regulations might be some things that engineers want to do and have more ability to do under Trump.
A couple of issues brought up that I thought are pretty on the button, like polarization and distrust. That like both these figures are fairly polarizing, right? That the major strategies is to feed the base, and like grow the base, not necessarily reaching across the aisle. And so that it kind of goes hand in hand with some of the stuff that you're talking about who will get these deals, right? And that those choices could feed the polarization, and even if there are innovations in AI, the sort of human cultural phenomenon of this distrust could derail things as well.
Well, and I mean, given the permissiveness of the regulations, right, deepfakes are probably less likely to be regulated. You've already seen Trump a willingness to retweet AI-generated videos of himself, like liberating Gaza, right? That video of him and Netanyahu sitting on the beach in front of like the Trump Hotel Gaza or whatever was AI generated. They've used and been the beneficiary of AI generated content, which means that like on the question of polarization or mistrust, they're actually agents that are furthering those things or deepening them. And so that's a very strong weakness towards their AI policy, is that they kind of model or are models for irresponsible AI use, right? Like when you're talking about like, is AI aligned with our values, our ethics, etc., the AI itself may not have the capacity to violate our values or our ethics, but like the Trump Musk folks seem to be modeling a kind of different set of values on what to use AI for, right? And not even to mention the fact that Musk has done things to the Twitter algorithm using artificial intelligence, right, to promote polarization, to increase the kind of appearance of certain voices on the algorithm. And there have been pretty good studies in the last year or so since he bought Twitter about the way that throttling in the new algorithmic system works on Twitter. And the way in which that has kind of led to more polarization. Twitter used to be kind of the like pseudo public square where you could go hear journalists talk or listen to a discussion between people. And nowadays, it's really hard not to find content that is kind of particularly driven by the interests of Elon Musk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like the one of the points that are brought up about the hype over substance. I was just having a discussion about all the claims that Musk has made in the past, even before he got super political about, what we would be doing on Mars or, self-driving cars by this point, and how those things have never really materialized. And he still makes those type of claims as he's doing work in Doge. And so, I think that might be part of the polarization and distrust, discussion, but
think about it this way, right? Like part of the Republican playbook for a long time has been, in order to increase people's distaste for federal governance, break the system in a way, right? So that people are like, oh, well, the government can't fix this problem. Well, many of the reasons why the government can't fix certain problems is because the programs we've put in place or the programs that existed for a long time have been kind of gutted in a way. And that drives mistrust because people are then not getting goods and services. I think maybe there's a sea change this time around. I think people are seeing who's responsible for the current problems with delivery of services, right? Like it's not just like this, the Department of Ed or the Department of Ag isn't doing what they're supposed to do. They're seeing active harm being done to those administrative services. So I think maybe there's a bit of a difference there. But it's certainly true that I think the way in which artificial intelligence kind of cleaves the political divide is very different than our traditional politics, right? I think the people who are pro AI can be both Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Conservative, Liberal, etc. And the people who are anti-AI can also be found all across the political spectrum. So it's one of those weird issues that I think isn't really driven by party politics or ideology necessarily.
Okay. All right. Let's talk some opportunities. Opportunities. Like what do you mean by opportunities when we're doing this analysis then?
I think one big opportunity we've already kind of mentioned, which is artificial general intelligence, right? The kind of holy grail silver bullet of AI science, the machine that can think for itself, right? We've got game playing machines. We've got language producing machines. We've got voice reproduction machines. We don't have a machine that can do your job, right? That can't get up in the morning, develop a schedule, carry out a set of predetermined self-driven tasks, figure out how those things are completed, and then do it again the next day in an iterative sense. I think that's a big opportunity under the Trump Musk administration. Now, I think the kind of threats and weaknesses that we will talk about make it not maybe the best opportunity. But given the kind of lax regulations, I think there is kind of a non-zero opportunity for something really kind of great and breakthrough to happen, right? I mean, if you're looking at kind of recent developments in science, Microsoft just developed the first quantum chip, right? That they're selling in the commercial market to big corporations. They're going to be able to do quantum computing with this new chip from Microsoft. Fusion energy. They've now got a fusion reactor that can last more than 15 minutes. That is a breakthrough that no one thought would be possible for another 50 years, right? And so I think what's going to happen, and one of the big opportunities here, is kind of a convergence of all these kind of advanced sciences, quantum computing, fusion technology, AI, in a way that I think people cannot predict, in a black swan kind of way, an event that may transform how we deal with climate, right? It may transform how we deal with income and work. And another huge opportunity here is, given the right guidelines, given the right guardrails, post-work might be a real opportunity here. The ability for most people in the middle and lower classes to move out of a set of laboring relations with the state and into, more of a kind of esoteric epistemological relationship with the world, right? And so I think that that's a huge opportunity here, but automation is, something that we would have to speak about on a whole other episode, right? And how that process might look.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up innovation basically outside of the coastal tech hubs that are known to be the centers of like AI innovation and things like that. Seattle, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, even New York is considered one of them. And so bringing it into the interior and applying it is definitely an opportunity in this one, since it's so much sort of like rabid support in those areas.
And being a perennial Midwesterner, right? We used to call Richardson, Texas, the Silicon Valley of the Midwest. Right, because there were so many tech companies in Richardson, Plano, Dallas. I went to a school that was primarily like a computer science, electrical engineering school. That was a coding hub for most of the North Texas like computer science companies. I currently work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We have a really cool computer science innovation business kind of program where students in their last 2 years in school build a startup company, basically, in some sort of computer or AI kind of startup field. And so I think that like there is a lot of kind of seeding of those technological things throughout the Midwest, et cetera. And so I think there is a big opportunity that some big breakthrough could happen. And say what you will about Trump's rhetoric, his economic policies when it comes to business, when it comes to industry, allows for a lot of companies to kind of do what they want and research what they want. And that provides a lot of space for growth, for innovation, for research. Now, I will say the flip side of that is they need the money to research. And a lot of the grants and R&D dollars, and we'll talk about that in a second, and threats don't exist anymore to support those programs.
Right. You're talking about like messaging a little bit, right? And I think that like one of the opportunities is the way that it can be framed in sort of like, all right, so national security, we got to beat China in this. It is now something that might be, people might be more likely to support it when in the past they might have thought that it's like, oh, this is not my issue, right? It's like, oh, it's like if they bring it into that sphere using this type of messaging, like there's problems with the messaging, but if you're focusing on the opportunities right now, it's like, okay, like people are more likely to support a bill that would fund this, if it was framed in that way.
They're more likely to read a news report or read an article or listen to the Ezra Klein podcast from a couple weeks ago that I've already mentioned, right? Like they're more likely to seek out information if they're curious about it. The more it interacts with them, right? I think more and more people in the workplace are becoming to like realize that AI is a tool they can use, right? Especially if you work in an office place, if you write a bunch, right? My wife is a grant writer and frequently will have it do research on grant opportunities for her on the internet. So there's a lot of that there. You also mentioned China, which I think is an opportunity we haven't really talked about. China and the United States, before Biden left office, were negotiating behind the scenes some kind of rules of the road for competitive AI. And I think that's an opportunity for Trump here, because one thing that Trump is actually really good at doing is when he wants something from a country that isn't, I don't know, taking ownership or annexing it like Greenland,
Right.
he's usually pretty good at getting parts of it, or at least the optics of it, right? And so I think if Trump wants to come to some sort of reach some sort of fait accompli with China over AI, like we both know we're racing for AGI, let's like have some standards for what that's going to look like, so we don't just like give our countries over to supercomputers and then tell it to like go beat China, right? I think that's a huge opportunity for Trump, right? China, I think he needs to make a deal with them, more than just trade. I think it's going to be more of a grand bargain deal, right? I think you've seen him ramping up the levers of strain on China and of pressure on them. Whether or not he uses that over Taiwan or the South China Sea or Korea or Japan, I think AI is another area he could use that on, that leverage he has developed over China. Give them something back in return for some concessions on AI development.
I think we also have an opportunity on the flip side, so we're kind of talking, it's like, oh, what can Trump and Musk do to their supporters, but also to their detractors. There's even then that's opportunities about sort of galvanizing pushback against tech elites. Seems like an opportunity. You know what I mean? It's like, because the way you're talking about optics before, a lot of the optics that are coming out of the White House are not doing them any favors, and it's actually sort of coalescing people. It's kind of like, you know what, I don't want these, like, for the last 20 years Silicon tech elites have been, like these sort of saviors of solving problems and things like that, and people starting to see the sort of cracks in that facade now because of the sort of the like move fast and break things philosophy that they're taking from Silicon Valley and applying to the White House.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of that, right? Like, I mean, I think even in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen folks like Mark Zuckerberg fall out of favor with the public, right? Elon Musk. I mean, the Tesla takedown movement, I think there were 350 protests over the weekend at different Tesla dealerships, right? So there's definitely the opportunity to rally around people who are doing this. And I think that there's also kind of a fear in a lot of people that what Musk and Trump want to do with AI is not good, right? This isn't the utopian, success story. What they want to do is use it to deport people, use it to arrest black kids, use it to, restrict books, right? So for liberals, the use of AI by Trump and Musk is actually kind of worst nightmare kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think that that's where we get into maybe our transition to the last section, which is threats, right? And so the threats that they propose provide an opportunity for their opponents, right?
Right,
because I think that they are actually actively supporting the use of things like AI to scan no-fly lists, to go through government databases of employees to figure out who to fire, to look for quote-unquote fraud and abuse in Social Security, right? And I think that if you start thinking about the ways in which citizens can organize, that was my cats fighting with each other, against an administration they may not agree with, these are really good sounding points to use in the public discussion about like where they went wrong. Right. And so I think one of the big threats is they use AI to kind of institute a form of governance that is less free, less just, less equitable, right? Concentrates power at the top, things like that. And I think that narrative does definitely present an opportunity for their opponents.
I love a term to kind of capture that. Now I didn't make it up, but techno-authoritarian creep. I love that. You know what I mean? It's a nice little sort of succinct way of doing it, like using AI, like surveillance and predictive policing to expand.
Which is a lot of what this topic has been about this year, right? Which is what's so fascinating about the Trump-Musk kind of coalition is a lot of the worst fears that the debate circuit has been talking about all year with facial recognition, with surveillance, with predictive policing are the exact kind of things that they want to institute more of.
Yeah. So let's immerse ourselves in the threats. This last section right here. So one of them was that techno-authoritarian creep. We were just talking about it, but we are also talking about disinformation. about how, like, yeah, this stuff can like process a lot of information, but that means that it could process a lot of disinformation at the same time. Deep fakes, chatbots. You could personalize your own little propaganda bubble that you're living in.
Well, I mean, and think about the next stage of this, right? So right now, what you have is about 4 or 5 networks trying to compete for the space that Fox used to occupy on the right. Right? You've got Real America News and One America News and This America Now and whatever, you've got 4 or 5 different like cable news stations. Now imagine you had an AI system that could generate a news outlet, that could generate a newscaster that looks real, that makes news sound real, but is actually just propaganda for the government, right? How would citizens know that this isn't like the actual reporting on what's going on in Israel and Yemen? How would citizens know that this is the state of the economy? I mean, already you have citizens who aren't sure which cable news station is telling you the truth. Hint, hint, most of them, not all the time, or not always telling the truth, folks. Right? But like citizens can't even really now discern which news outlet is the most veracious. The most truthful. The one that has the most veracity. And then you start introducing AI generated news stories, AI generated content, fake videos. And then the holy grail for these folks would be a fake news 24/7 news cycle generated by AI based on what they think they can pump into the machine. And at that point, it becomes almost impossible to tell, from a citizen's point of view, you're living in 1984 now. Right? You're living in Orwell's 1984, where reality is almost entirely shaped by ministries that govern what is and what is not reality.
Right. I think that dystopian thing would feed also into the threat of greater global instability, right? Like, and so retreating from like international cooperation agreements and things like that, makes it so like there becomes now dozens of different approaches to AI. There's not one unified way that we can, where we have a shared reality with people halfway across the globe. And now, since we are all living in our own little sort of like either nationalistic or personal or partisan bubbles, that creates, when you don't have a shared reality, I think that increases the chances for instability.
Well, and I mean, look at the last time the planet got together and did something together. That really mattered, right? That was the ozone layer. That was 40 years ago. The planet realized chlorofluorocarbons were a bad chemical and we should not put them into the air. And every country on the planet, from North Korea to the United States, was like, yep, we're banning them. Right? It was just, and it happened, I think, either right before the end of the Cold War or right after the end of the Cold War, at a time when we seemed like people did not share a reality. Right? But when it came to something like the ozone layer and, oh my God, we're going to evaporate the atmosphere. Now take that time period and compare it to today, where Trump and Musk are pulling back from the global stage. They've signaled to Europe they do not want to help with the defense of Ukraine. They've signaled to Israel to go ahead and do whatever you want, damn our allies in the Middle East. And so I think that when you're thinking about global instability, if you're a country that's developing rogue AI that can develop nuclear weapons or biological weapons, you're racing to get there, right? And given what we've seen with how quickly they've cracked ChatGPT, with how quickly the Chinese were able to build something like DeepSeek with low compute power, right? Driving other countries in the world away is not a smart thing to do when we are on the brink of AI that could be globally devastating. Right? And so maintaining alliances, maintaining good relationships, maintaining global leadership in a peaceful and kind of useful way is key in times like this, right? Can you imagine if the world had turned away from the United States after we had used the nuclear bomb? And instead we had become an isolated and angry nation with 500 nuclear weapons? How different the Cold War would have looked, right? I think that's a really good point to end on, which is friends are good, and make more of them,
Yeah. All right. I mean, we didn't even get into things like autonomous weapons. I think that would be,
the use of drones, the use of police drones, the use of military drones. All of those are, I think, threats, as well as opportunities to reduce human casualties on the battlefield.
Yeah.
If you want to go fight some terrorists, like lethal autonomous weapons might be your best option, right?
Yeah.
So
all these things would have looked very different under a different administration. I think we'd be having a very different. You would be having a very different season, and this would be a very different episode. And so, yeah, I think.
Well, I think we've kind of had 2 debate seasons, right? We
Yeah.
had the pre-election season and then the post-Trump election season,
Right.
because so many things have gone the opposite direction. So,
yeah, it's kind of a perfect storm with the topic that was chosen and falling right on one of the more divisive elections that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yep.
Yeah.
And next week, I think we're talking NFA prep, how to get ready for the national tournament. It's about 2 weeks away. So as we roll up towards NFA, get ready, folks. Big national tournament's coming.
Excellent. Well, we will cross that bridge when we get to it next week. All right.
All right. Sounds good, Jared.
Bye.